Hey there, it's Silver. This is Dreadhunter. So Dreadhunter is basically a twin-stick shooter, but it's going for more or less kind of like a light action RPG kind of fusion with that. And it's got a pretty simple setup, but it's also got some pretty neat ideas mixed in with that. So the first thing to talk about is the visuals, because it's got a relatively interesting visual style. It's not like super striking, really terribly unique, but it is nice looking. And it helps that the game has quite a few different tile sets that it will alternate between, so as you're going through the levels, it doesn't feel like you're in the same places over and over again. In fact, that's one of the main compliments I would level at the current early access state of the game, is that there's a large amount of environmental variety, which definitely helps avoid that feeling of too much repetition. But overall, this might sound kind of weird, but overall the game kind of reminds me visually of Darkspore. And I know that's a little bit of a weird game to sort of pull out of the void, but it does sort of remind me of the way Darkspore looked. You are in this cool sort of customizable mech suit thing with a lot of heavy weaponry, and your enemies are the Dread, which seem to be these sort of biomechanical, mutated things that are made of various bits of flesh and machinery melded together in such a way as to create these monstrous forms. So the environments do have a relatively good sense of atmosphere. There's a lot of clutter, which I like. You'll find that the rooms never feel empty. You know, wherever you are, it'll have something around the rooms to make them feel a little bit more alive. If you're in like a space station, it'll have various bits of machinery and mysterious tubes and all sorts of things like that to give a little bit of extra atmosphere. Lots of like computer terminals and stuff around the place. If you're in like some sort of cave, it'll have like eggs and a lot of stone and stuff around the place to just get a little bit of visual interest in there so that things never look too empty, which I appreciate, but it also never approaches that like heavily greebly sci-fi state where everything is just a little bit too cluttered and it's difficult to actually point out like what the enemies are and stuff in a pinch. This game has a relatively Spartan look to it, so there is clutter, but there's not so much that it actually takes away from your ability to focus on the enemies and things like that. Speaking of the enemies, I think this is another thing they've done a good job on so far, is the enemies have very recognizable silhouettes. They all look quite different from each other, so as soon as you see an enemy, you pretty much immediately know what it's capable of, which I appreciate, especially because this game does get quite hectic. In the later levels, there are a lot of enemies on screen, so being able to pick out what the threats are immediately is important, and they've done a good job of making all of the enemy models pretty creative and also just really recognizable so you know what they can do. As for what you can do, you've got 3 different weapon slots that you can switch between at any given time. So you've got a light, a medium, and a heavy weapon slot, and there's quite a few different weapons that can be slotted into each one, so there's a good amount of variety. You've also got 2 ability slots. Right now, I think there are only 2 abilities in the game currently, at least there's only 2 that I've found, which are a grenade and a storm of missiles. Homing missiles, specifically. And you've also got just your classic health gauge. There's no, like, shield or regeneration or anything like that. You just have health. And you'll notice that your ammo is actually relatively scarce. Every weapon has its own ammo pool, every slot. And the pools are pretty small. You will run into a lot of enemies, so you will run out of ammo pretty quickly if you're not careful. And the way that it works is it's based on the fact that you also have a melee weapon slot, and as you kill enemies, or well, really as you damage enemies, they'll eventually go down into this sort of stunned state, and if you kill them with a melee attack in that state, then they'll drop a bunch of ammo and health pickups. So this is the primary way that you're actually going to be collecting more ammo and health. In fact, I think this is the only way you can heal yourself. As far as I've seen, there isn't any other way to heal other than to actually destroy enemies with your melee weapon and collect the healing pickups. And you will sometimes find some ammo boxes around the place that will restore your ammo just by walking into them, but not a lot of them and not very much. So the main source of ammo for you is going to be these melee kills. So they were clearly influenced by stuff like Doom Eternal's melee kill system, where you have relatively small ammo pools for each weapon, but you can restore those pools effectively by doing these sort of low health execution moves. I should mention they're not actually like special moves, they're not like canned animations or anything like that, they're just using your melee attack on the right click to kill things. As far as I know, killing an enemy with a melee attack always drops some health and ammo, even if they weren't previously in that downed state. It's just that there are a lot of enemies that are very dangerous and you don't necessarily want to be meleeing them unless you can down them into that state first. Your two abilities are on separate cooldowns, and you've also got a dash. This is actually a triple dash, which is pretty cool. So you've got 3 different dash charges that you can use, and they do take a little bit to regenerate, so you can't like spam it, but it does cover quite a significant distance, especially if you chain all 3 at once, so you can cover like an entire room really quickly. I'm not sure if the dash specifically gives you immunity frames or not. I haven't really been able to test, but it is still really good for getting around storms of projectiles or away from big melee slams and things like that. So it is your main method of defense. And the way that the overall structure works, like I mentioned, is pretty simple. You just go on a mission. This mission will have a specific objective, usually destroy this big nasty thing, and you'll be put in a sort of proc gen area that is a tile set based on the sort of area you're going to, so like a space station or a cave or an asteroid or things like that, and you will then traverse these areas and kill all the enemies that you can find, and usually open some chests and things along the way to get some extra loot, and eventually you'll find the final room that will have a big boss battle in it, kill the boss, and you can go back to the hub area. The boss variety is actually pretty good so far, I would say. Obviously, there could always be more, and I expect they'll definitely be adding more as the early access campaign goes on, but as it stands right now, just for like its current, just now launching status, I think there's actually a relatively good variety of bosses to face. Although one thing you will find is that the bosses in this game spawn extra enemies to fight, at like an alarming rate. Bosses spawn huge waves of extra enemies to fight. I think this is sort of required because of that low ammo cap you have, and bosses have quite a lot of health, so you are going to run out of ammo very quickly, so you need waves of fodder enemies to kill in order to, execute them and get that ammo back. So I think the fact that, bosses spawn huge waves of extra enemies is actually just sort of a necessary evil for how the structure of the game works, because otherwise you would just run out of ammo super fast and have no way to defend yourself. The game does have some very light RPG elements as well to go along with it. So first off, you do have a character level that simply goes up by killing enemies, and when you level up, you'll get some skill points, and there is a sort of selection, a screen of various different things that you can put these points into, and more of them will unlock as you level up. So at first, you'll only have access to a couple of things you can enhance, like say your fire rate or your ammo pools. Overall, you can enhance the size of your ammo pools, but eventually you'll get more advanced stuff as well, like the ability to get more health from health pickups and things like that. Although personally, I would actually say I would like this to work a little bit differently, because the way that it currently works is the percentage increments that you are getting per skill point are really, really small, like 2%. So you don't really feel much of a difference for several levels until you build up more points to actually make more of a difference. And I would actually like it if instead you had fewer upgrades, but they were each more impactful. So instead of making me buy 2% fire rate upgrades, how about just giving me 10% fire rate upgrade? It's the same amount, so balance-wise it adds up the same. It's just that the one skill point feels more impactful because the upgrades themselves are larger individually. I just think it would be maybe a better idea to have fewer upgrades that you increment, but the increments are larger each time, instead of having these really teeny tiny like 2% upgrades. You've also, one thing I really like, got a skill tree for each of your active skills. This is a cool idea, giving each of those skills its own skill tree with some variant skills within it to obtain if you get enough points. That's pretty cool. So as you gain experience, your equipped skills will also gain experience, and you can spend their own skill points in their own specific trees. So you can change your grenade into a shrapnel grenade or a cluster grenade, or add more missiles to your homing missile salvo and things like that. So this is a cool idea. I like how they've implemented it, and I would like to see more of it, and I expect that as they add more active skills, they will all have these large trees that have some extra ways that you can spec this ability to be something a little bit different, a little bit more specialized. I think it's a cool idea. You've also got several armor pieces. These are cool because they actually do physically change the way your sort of exosuit thing looks, which I appreciate. And you have several different slots for armor pieces, and you drop them just as loot from killing enemies or from chests and bosses and things like that. And they each have a different amount of health and armor, as well as sometimes some extra stuff, like making your dash explode and things like that, or making your kinetic weapons fire 50% faster. So I like the way that they've done the armor because they tend to have pretty significant effects, like a lot of the extra stuff that you can find. It's not like a teeny, 1.5% extra crit chance. It's like something large and impactful, which I appreciate. And it sort of gives each different cosmetic type of armor its own sort of theme as to what it modifies, which is cool. And then you, of course, have the weapons themselves. And the weapons are pretty varied. You've got the plasma repeaters and explosive guns, which are like light weapons that fire fast-moving explosive shells. You've got grenade launchers, rocket launchers, plasma cannons, assault rifles, SMGs, these big sort of minigun-like things with a bunch of barrels that are super cool. I think they're just called chain guns. Those are really fun. So yeah, you've got a good variety of weapons, which I definitely like. But sometimes when you drop a weapon, you will also find that it has extra bits on it, like, a small increase to a chance to do something. And I would like it personally if these were a little bit more exciting, because there are a couple of effects in the game that are a lot more interesting. Like, for instance, I found a plasma weapon that actually causes electricity to arc between the orbs and damage enemies with like a chain lightning effect. That's really cool, and that's something that I want to keep in my arsenal because it's really fun to use. I would like to see more of the weapon effects be that impactful, be things that are that cool. You can really do this with like proc chances, give me like a 20% proc chance for an explosive round, or a 10% proc chance for an ignite, or something like that. Giving me those sorts of things tends to make the weapons more impactful feeling, and I would like it if a lot of the extra effects that weapons can potentially drop with are that interesting. You'll also notice that there is a level system. Every piece of equipment, weapon, or gear has a level, and it's pretty simple. Just higher level stuff has better stats. This is something that I think the UI needs to be a little bit better in regards to showing you, because you actually have to hover over every individual thing in this big grid to see what level it is. So you may have like 5 assault rifles. They all look the same, but some of them are a higher level than others, and you've got to hover over each one individually to see which ones. It would be nice if like the little thumbnail for each item had its level on it, so you could immediately just at a glance see the item levels without having to individually hover everything. And I think the item level system lends itself well to having more of those exciting proc effects and things on them. So, higher level items have a better chance for these more interesting weapon effects and things. So the scaffolding is there for a way to, in my opinion, make this system a little bit more interesting. And I would like to see the best parts of how it currently works be how it always works, basically, if that makes sense. Like, there's some really cool and interesting effects in this game. It's just that there aren't a whole lot of them on the weapons yet. So more of those. There are also a couple of other things that I can't really comment on yet because they're not implemented. There is a currency system. You get currency from killing enemies and completing missions and things, but you can't actually use it for anything yet. There is a shop, there's going to be a shop, so I assume you're going to be able to buy weapons and gear and stuff with all this currency, maybe even modify some of the stuff you already have with the currency, but unfortunately I can't comment on how that works just yet. There are also mods you can pick up, modifications that presumably you're going to be able to attach to weapons and gear to further customize them, but currently that's also not in the game just yet, so I can't tell you exactly how that's going to work. Overall, I think this is a really good start for a solid twin-stick shooter. As far as the early access goes, it currently feels very polished, so it doesn't have a huge amount of content in it yet, but what is here, I haven't encountered any major bugs or anything like that. There's not been any instability or crashes or anything, so it is quite a polished experience so far. I do think it's a little bit expensive. I would suggest that the game should be somewhere closer to like $20-ish for the current amount of content that it offers. I think $35 is a little bit of a harder ask for people based on what's currently in the game. I have no doubt that $35 might be a really good price for the full game once all of its systems are actually in it, because it looks like there's going to be some really interesting stuff. It's just that that's not here yet, and it is a little bit harder to convince people to pay that much for something that is currently still very incomplete feeling. But I do have a good amount of faith that it will be a pretty interesting twin-stick shooter once some more of the mechanics get in and some more of the current mechanics get tuned to be a little bit more interesting and things like that. I think it's got a lot of promise, and what's currently here is definitely a lot of fun. So that is my current take on Dreadhunter. Pretty good time, and I'll leave the link in the description below this video to the Steam store page so that you can go and check it out yourselves. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.